fuck the government, fuck inflation, fuck COVID.
There's a game that's being played on a financial level.
I discovered Bitcoin in college.
So how do I then use my Bitcoin?
This is Bitcoin's moment. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I think we'll have a really fun conversation, a lot to talk about, now more than most any other time in crypto. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And I think just kicking it off, just tell us a little bit about kind of your journey into crypto. When did it start for you? And yeah, how did you get to this exact point?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I discovered Bitcoin in college thanks to my roommate who was in computer science at the time. I studied politics, philosophy, economics program. But Bitcoin was always just kind of a hobby. I never really thought of it like becoming a job. But a couple years after I first found it, about a year after I finished undergrad, I was preparing for law school. And thanks to two friends, Bully Esquire, who you may know from Twitter, and then Catherine Wu, she and I worked together at Masari for a bit. They both kind of convinced me you probably don't want to go down the law school route, at least initially. Check out crypto a little more. And I took their advice and have been having a lot of fun, some pain ever since. So that's kind of how I got in the industry, like professionally. Worked at Masari for a bit, worked at a couple of really cool Bitcoin companies, was in Bitcoin mining for several years. And then Bitcoin kind of got really boring. And that was the first time I was very seriously considering just kind of leaving crypto as a job. Like it started as a hobby, became a profession. And I thought, maybe this was around like the FTX time and just like absolute chaos in the industry. Didn't shake my conviction in Bitcoin as an investment or as a technology at all. But I thought maybe this isn't where I want to like work, for the next 10 years. And Bitcoin itself, which I'm sure we can get into later, was kind of like dead as an ecosystem, as a blockchain. But fast forward a year, I guess, several months, a lot of that changed. And I found Willem and Alicia, the co-founders of Botanix Labs, through a mutual friend. And very excited to be on the team now. I think definitely one of the most promising Bitcoin teams I've seen in quite a long time. I hate the label like OG. I don't consider myself an OG. There's tons of people who got into Bitcoin long before I did. But I've been around for a bit, seen lots of Bitcoin teams come and most of them go, and very bullish on our team now. So yeah, lots of cool stuff to come.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like our experience with the Botanix team has always been positive. Obviously, met them, I think, probably a little bit before you did, and just kind of really enjoyed the work ethic, the kind of perspective around what it is that they want to do. And we've actually done some coverage on Botanix just from a Blockmates perspective, and it was completely coincidental that you happened to be a part of the Botanix team because I was trying to get you on way before that, and then obviously you made that official announcement quite recently. So yeah, congrats. Just going back to kind of like the Bitcoin perspective on things. I mean, obviously, like you said, something quite interesting in that, and I agree with you, is that Bitcoin did become quite boring. It was almost like the same things were being said over and over again, and I think there's tremendous value there, and I'm sure you agree. But then at the same time, it almost felt like, it was this big ship that was essentially going in a straight line, and it wasn't really doing anything else. What is it that you enjoyed about Bitcoin the most? I mean, it's all cool. It's cool if you get into the cliche of what Bitcoin is, but what is it that you have always enjoyed about Bitcoin? But what is it that you potentially are enjoying about Bitcoin now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess, where should I start? So I got into Bitcoin for purely ideological reasons. I studied Austrian economics in school, a little bit different than most people, when they go to a traditional undergrad economics department. And yeah, I don't think I'm necessarily like an anarchist, but my political leanings in some key things definitely lean libertarian. And a lot of the like Bitcoin's for everyone, but you can't deny it's sort of like cypherpunk libertarian roots, and that really attracted me. What I enjoy most about Bitcoin, I guess, is nobody can take it from me, from anyone. It's mine, and I want it to kind of take over the world in terms of like an all-encompassing financial tool that's permissionless, globally distributed, fully decentralized, and unstoppable. And that's a that's a pretty big goal. And I don't know if you still believe this, but I remember Matt Corallo, like 2018, 2019, I think. Don't quote me on that, but he used to say something along the lines of Bitcoin is so ambitious, he would give it like a 5 or 10% chance of actually succeeding long term.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if I would assign it that low of a probability of succeeding, but I think his, like, what I took from that general point is a lot of people are overconfident that Bitcoin has already won or succeeded, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that ties right into, yeah, what you and I were just talking about a minute ago, that Bitcoin kind of died. And I think it like people are just complacent. A lot of them still are. They think like Bitcoin is very young and immature. It has not won sort of or accomplished its goal in any way, as far as I'm concerned. Like Bitcoin has done a lot of cool stuff from 2008 to 2024. Yeah, the progress has been amazing, but there's still a long way to go. And I think people lose sight of that very easily. And I think, I mean, so there's all these different epochs and periods in Bitcoin's history, controversy over protocol changes and narrative changes and all this stuff. But especially around COVID, this new like class of Bitcoin people who came in like we want to hedge against inflation, sort of like f the government. Am I allowed to curse on here? I don't know.
Yes,
Um,
you are.
okay,
Absolutely, you are.
yeah. So their idea is like fuck the government, fuck inflation, fuck COVID. I want to own Bitcoin and be
Yeah.
rich, and that's all I want to do with it. And that like that's not a terrible idea in a setting where it's couched in a lot of other things, but as the only reason or vision for Bitcoin, I think it's horrible. And it just sort of like accelerated this idea of never doing anything with Bitcoin, never trying to build anything cool on Bitcoin, which has always been like a fixture of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very difficult to build on, but people have always tried to build things on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And before ordinals and inscriptions, Bitcoin got to a point where no one was building anything, and even like the biggest stablecoin in the industry, which launched first on Bitcoin, left Bitcoin. Like, and
Mm.
that Bitcoin was in a very bad state, in my opinion. Um, and I was fortunate enough to sort of hear what the Taproot Wizards team were trying to do, like trying to break Bitcoin, like catch on the very new at that point inscriptions trend. And it seemed crazy, but it seemed really fun. And I had no idea at that point how long it would last or how crazy it would get. But it seemed just like it hit the right spot for me of being just new enough and crazy enough and experimental enough that maybe doing things on Bitcoin will be cool again. And then obviously we saw all of that energy from inscriptions and ordinals spill over into like BRC20s and runes, and now all of these new like layer twos and meta protocols and things. And like building on Bitcoin, using Bitcoin is cool again. And I think we have a very strong chance of kind of recentering Bitcoin back into like the epicenter of, or the gateway of crypto, which is how it used to be. Like you used to buy Bitcoin and then explore like the rest of crypto. Now, new people in crypto, like Ether or Solana, is their gateway or their
Yeah.
first step. They
Mm.
have no reason to touch Bitcoin because Bitcoin is irrelevant. And I think in large part, kind of the culture of that COVID class of Bitcoin, where you buy Bitcoin, you tweet at Michael Saylor, and you listen to podcasts, and that's all you do, has become very prevalent, and that's not great.
Yeah, I mean that's my sentiment is exactly the same as yours around that. Is that there's there's obviously the kind of like the Austrian economics, the economics kind of like foundation that's there, and I completely appreciate the fundamentals around that. But then there's kind of like, well, how do you make this whole thing interesting for people. And the argument would be, well, you don't really need to make it interesting. It's kind of like, well, Bitcoin is a savings account and you put your money in it, and it kind of prevents the debasement of your currency and all the rest of it. But then when I ask the question, so how do I actually use this as a tool to actually further myself in this whole game that is life, regardless of what your values might be? There's a game that's being played on a financial level. So how do I then use my Bitcoin to do that? I don't really get the kind of answer that maybe something like Ethereum would give me. But then I know that there's also challenges there. So how
Yeah.
do you see Bitcoin kind of like as this savings account entity where I'm now putting my money into it being used as a tool to further my financial goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I mean, obviously the Ethereum ecosystem has been wildly successful in some like non-trivial part because of like Bitcoin's failings. To like building on Bitcoin could and I think should be a lot easier. And like soft shell, but like that's kind of what Botanix Labs was created to try and to help facilitate. But other people, long before Botanix was founded, have been trying to do that also. But Ethereum and other blockchains are trying to fill gaps and create cool stuff in crypto. I used to be just going on a side tangent here before I answer your real question. I used to be a lot more of a hardliner Bitcoin maximalist, and I still would consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I know a lot of cool people in crypto who like privately would call themselves like Bitcoin maximalists in the sense of they love Bitcoin more than anything. They want Bitcoin to succeed. But they're not this like weird, cringe, kind of puritanical type of investor who hates everything else and only loves Bitcoin. I don't identify with that at all, and I hope those people leave. But I think thanks to I genuinely hope they do. I think some key influences in changing my views over the years. I would say like maybe soften my views or just open my perspective to some things that I thought would fail but have actually been kind of successful. Chris Bernisky at Placeholder, Nick Carter, and Udi at Taproot Wizards. There are some others, but those people have, in their public opinions and in some private conversations, I think been super helpful. And I know they all love Bitcoin more than anything. They also love other
Yeah.
stuff,
Mm.
but they love Bitcoin and they want it to succeed. How I see Bitcoin succeeding is kind of like the culture is a key part of the technology. Without the culture, the technology is much less valuable. Obviously, the technology on its own will always be valuable, but you need a strong culture of experimentation and trying things. And there's a lot of like whitewashing going on with this new like class of generation of Bitcoiners, but like gambling, experimental building, just sort of like this like degen type of crypto culture was always a native thing to Bitcoin's community, to Bitcoin's culture. And now people are much more fixated on like this whitewash perspective of Bitcoin to appease Wall Street, to like not run afoul of any sort of like regulatory or political issue. And it makes absolutely no sense. Like Bitcoin is categorically anti-establishment. And you shouldn't like probably go out and commit crimes with it, but like you should push the envelope
Yeah.
and do bold and creative things. And I think that culture has been I think it's coming back, but for a while it was completely missing from Bitcoin. So the way I see, to answer your question, the way I see sort of like Bitcoin being useful is people trying to build things that exist in the way that the world economy and financial system work now on and around Bitcoin. And it's like a very simple goal. It's not an easy goal because well, for a lot of reasons, taking on the fiat infrastructure is difficult, and building on Bitcoin itself is not the easiest thing in the world. But that's what that future looks like. And all these teams in the past like 18 months who started building things on the Bitcoin base layer and trying to build Bitcoin layer twos, I think are discovering that, building on Bitcoin is difficult, but building on Bitcoin is fun. And, I hope this energy and this trend is just getting started and continues.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does have that real spark and the kind of like this almost like, okay, well, there's actually possibility here And it's not just about, and you brought up, it's kind of like, yes, there is the gambling side to it, and this kind of like in many ways you could argue that it's pretty sucky, and but then out of that comes like the learning from those mistakes that people make and developers make, and then there's that growth that inevitably is going to happen. You know, it's very similar to what happened in the early '90s with the dot com bubble, but I think this is even more substantial. It almost seems like, you know, we're playing with something that's a lot more kind of like, I think, pertinent, and that's money ultimately. You know, the one thing that really does kind of like separate everything from everything, if that makes any sense. And now we have the opportunity to kind of like, okay, well, how do we actually replicate and improve what TradFi has done? Which
Yeah.
clearly that's what EVM has attempted to do, and in many ways has succeeded, and then in other ways it's kind of like led us into like other paths, which you could argue aren't like the best thing for crypto. And like I totally get where people come from and say like, well, meme coins aren't great. I mean, I think they're great because what do? They're basically opening the door for people that would never have walked in. And
Yeah.
and just coming back to the wizards, just give us a little bit of context around how that came about. I mean, obviously you spoke about how like the guys were trying to break Bitcoin at the time, and I mean that's like really important in terms of like how it came about, and then ordinals and runes. Like, just give us kind of like your experience of that, because it almost feels like you were at the pulse of what was like this new thing, and clearly it has been a very new and interesting thing, and really did light the fire in Bitcoin at the beginning or at the end of last year, particularly.
Yeah. I excuse me. A couple things I wanted to touch on there. Yeah, I'll talk about the Wizards and their. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think they're a cool team. But
Yeah,
you also mentioned something about like experimenting and trial and error and all of that, and I think that's really important for like understanding where Bitcoin is now, because like I personally don't think like the Ethereum blockchain is ever just going to die off and the ecosystem, is going to disappear. I think that's a fantasy. Uh, but or in addition to that, like Bitcoin kind of going through this like dark ages stagnation period is not just bad in like a vacuum where like Bitcoin kind of sat there useless, because at the same time the Ethereum ecosystem went through so much growth and trial and error, and yeah, of course they have problems and scaling issues, and but they are light years ahead of where Bitcoin is as like an ecosystem, and Bitcoin is going to go through many of the same mistakes that Ethereum has if like people keep trying to build on Bitcoin. So that just like contextualizes a little bit more how far behind like Bitcoin is in terms of becoming like internet money or money for the internet. And I think people have kind of lost that meme. Like that's what Bitcoin is. And when you think of like, okay, like how many applications are there for an internet money? That's like everything. So
yeah,
like we should want to use Bitcoin for everything. Some of it will be scams. Some of it will be really cool stuff. And lots of stuff, will fall between those two ends of the spectrum. But I think, okay, I'll get at the Wizards in just a minute, I promise. Just a lot of things that I wanted to get off my mind here. I think to people who are upset about some of the problems and scams and things that are kind of around Bitcoin, around crypto in general, I think they need to understand two things. One, with any technology, you'll have scams. That's just part of like an adoption cycle for new technology, especially financial technology. Um, but the second thing is the reason why it may seem exacerbated more than other areas of the world or technology is because the traditional financial system has become so walled off and cloistered and permissioned increasingly over time that it's kind of like this like experimentation that's happening all around the world is kind of like a beach ball underwater. So when Bitcoin and crypto unleashed this, it's not just like a normal kind of scam adoption cycle phase period. It's this explosion of people doing all sorts of crazy stuff that could have kind of happened a little bit more slowly and measured over time, but didn't, because the financial system kept becoming so restricted and walled off. Now crypto comes on the scene and everyone can do anything they want, and it just kind of it opens the floodgates, and things will calm down. Like there will always be scams, but it probably won't be as bad as it has been or is maybe now. That's kind of like that's how I think about the drawbacks and scams, and even I don't want to call them the meme coin scams, although some of them are, but just like the fun, crazy, weird shit that people see in crypto. There are some very important like cultural and historical aspects for why crypto is, maybe worse than people would like it to be. Crypto's awesome, but a lot of the scams, kind of turn people off. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox and talk about Wizards. I just am lucky to kind of have some friends on the team, and I love Bitcoin. They love Bitcoin, and we talk about Bitcoin a lot. And they kind of told me they were very quiet about it at first, but they told me like we want to do something a little bit crazy, and it seemed really cool. I guess I was like early to it, but that was merely a function of luck. And I think what they've done with their team, their vision for not only their team, but how they want to change Bitcoin culture is fantastic. And I think it would be fair to say they kind of I know they saw Bitcoin very similarly to how I did, sort of during that like dead period. And I think their view was, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, nobody's building on Bitcoin anymore. We want to try something a little bit adventurous. Let's, see how it goes. And they shout out also to the Luxor team. They worked with Luxor to mine the biggest block in Bitcoin history, introduce the Taproot Wizards to the world, which I also love for a very sentimental, everyone should love for a very sentimental value, because it sort of reaches back beyond this like dead period in Bitcoin, like way, way back, even before I got into Bitcoin, and takes the Bitcoin wizard like meme, the icon, which is kind of like a fixture of Bitcoin culture, and revives it, kind of as a symbolism of let's revive all of this stuff together. Let's make Bitcoin fun again. Let's make building on Bitcoin cool again. Let's create a fun, experimental culture, edgy culture, and push Bitcoin, forward a little bit. We're not content to leave Bitcoin to the Michael Saylors and the weird podcasters of the world, and we want to make Bitcoin fun again. Bitcoin lost its place, kind of as it's obviously the largest Bitcoin or the largest cryptocurrency by market cap, but culturally and for new people coming to crypto, like they have no reason to really care about Bitcoin. And the vision kind of was to change that for everyone. Taproot Wizards, a bunch of the runes and other inscriptions teams, everyone. So I'm very proud to know a bunch of these people who kind of really care about Bitcoin and have spent a ton of time and capital over the past 18 months trying to make Bitcoin fun and active again. And I think they've achieved really cool results that I hope to continue to multiply over the next at least couple halving cycles. We'll see what happens. But also, I guess I should caveat that by saying this is kind of Bitcoin's moment. Like Bitcoin has been dead for a while, and this is I don't want to say it's our last chance by any means, but this is a very pivotal time for Bitcoin. Like there's a lot of attention on Bitcoin. There's a lot of effort going into building on Bitcoin. And maybe it fails. Maybe people are like, yep, fuck this. I'm going back to Ethereum. Bitcoin was fun for a little bit again, but it's not going to last. And if it fizzles out, that would be pretty sad. But yeah, I think this next halving epoch, I guess, the next 4 years, will be very important to see, what the future of Bitcoin looks like.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I think
Sorry for ranting so much. That was a long monologue there.
No. That's the whole point of bringing you on, is to get those perspectives, and do appreciate it. So I think the really interesting thing for me at the moment, and something that I'm interrogating a lot, is kind of like this relationship between Bitcoin as obviously this layer, right? So the security layer, the most efficient network that the most secure and probably the most efficient network that we've created as a species. And it has this ability from a security perspective, and then you've got smart contracts and that capability, and obviously there's challenges there, but there's the capability. Trust is permissionless, and more importantly, the ability to actually function as a financial instrument or financial instruments, lending,
Yep.
borrowing, all those good things. Now, for me, what I'm finding really interesting at the moment is this experiment of what does the relationship between Bitcoin and EVM look like? I mean, obviously Botanix is one of them. There's a couple of others. I think Core's doing a great job. And there's one or two where they've actually stepped in and they've actually said, okay, this is our commitment to the industry. We want to actually bring Bitcoin in as this collateral-based or collateral-based value that we can actually use to actually lend and borrow, but then to obviously create, this locked value. Whether it's a meme or not, that's a separate discussion, and we could probably have another show just on TVL. But I think what's interesting for me, and I think the question that keeps coming up for me is like, is it really going to be possible for this relationship to grow and for it to be efficient and for it to be secure and more importantly for it to benefit people in the medium to long term? Short term, I don't really see that happening because obviously, like you said, there's still a lot that needs to be figured out. But what are your thoughts around that? I mean, that's another big question, but I think it's really pertinent in terms of, like you say, Bitcoin's interesting again. Here's this possibility. Where does it now go and what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. There's a few different components there. I think so. I said this a few minutes ago. I think Bitcoin is the winningest base layer. I know a lot of the industry disagrees with that, but in terms of security and decentralization and just like a rock solid base layer protocol to build on top of, I think Bitcoin is the best. And that doesn't mean like other base layers are bad per se. They just aren't as good.
Yeah.
But that's a separate question than like evaluating things like the EVM, which are not a like monetary layer. Bitcoin is the strongest, most secure, most lindy monetary layer, but there's software layers that enter the picture too, and that's what the EVM is. And a lot of people, most people, I would say, no, the EVM probably isn't the best virtual machine in crypto. Lots of problems with the EVM, but it's definitely the most lindy, most ubiquitous. And I guess like like what Botanix Labs goal is to pair those two things. Like we're strong believers in the Lindy effect, I guess to put it most generally, and pairing Bitcoin with the EVM just makes perfect sense for a few different reasons. We kind of pioneered this idea in like early 2022 in early ideation, and then shortly a little bit later, the white paper was published, and that idea is kind of caught on. And you see a lot of these. Maybe copycat is a little bit too harsh of a label, but other people trying to iterate on this idea, I guess. And we don't need to like get into the details of them. I have some issues and some thoughts on a lot of those other protocols, but the idea is, yeah, like take something that has been used very heavily and very ubiquitously throughout the rest of crypto and pair it with Bitcoin, software layer, monetary layer, piece them together, and the goal, the hope, the project is to build a vibrant ecosystem on Bitcoin with battle-tested technologies, with a user experience for developers and for users that's very familiar, has a lot of infrastructure built around it. And I think that may be one of the reasons, like not taking that approach, maybe one of the reasons why some of these other Bitcoin projects in the past haven't had success. They've tried to building things from scratch is never a terrible approach, like on its own, but you kind of have to step back for a minute and realize, all right, we've tried to build so many things from scratch on Bitcoin, and none of them have really taken off. So what if we just use something that everyone else already uses and has already been successful, and just bring it over to Bitcoin? And I think that may be the key, or a key, to unlocking a much more vibrant ecosystem on top of Bitcoin. I don't want to I'm very bullish on the spider chain, what Botanix Labs is building, but I also don't want to, and I know our team doesn't share the vision of layer two maximalism, in the sense of like there should only be one winning layer two on Bitcoin. Like I don't want to live in that world. I think there should, like, Bitcoin is the winningest chain. There will always be other chains that meet different use cases, but even on top of Bitcoin, there should be, and I hope there always will be, other types of layer twos. I think there's more than enough Bitcoins and more than enough users to have different layer two ecosystems built on top of Bitcoin. I think ours is very strong for a bunch of different reasons, but it would kind of be I don't want to use the word failure, but it would be a disappointment if there were no other successful layer twos long term. And a lot of layer twos are still trying to find their like product market fit. I think the Lightning Labs team, I know the Lightning Labs team is a very strong Bitcoin focused team. But I think it would be fair to say like the adoption of that layer two hasn't happened as quickly or as widely as a lot of people hoped. Um, and it's just part of building new things on a new technology. Like, there's unexpected delays and maybe the market doesn't react exactly how you predict. And I'm sure we'll encounter some of that also as we continue building. But yeah, to recap all that, I guess, like take things that work and you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Bitcoin works. It's the best as far as I'm concerned. The EVM works. It's very Lindy and battle tested and isn't perfect, but everyone is familiar with it. So just piece those two things together. And I think we can have a very, 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 very cool outcome in terms of like building an ecosystem on Bitcoin with that recipe for a layer two.
Yeah, I mean, Core actually announced that they had secured 2,000 Bitcoin, where people have actually committed that to TVL. And I think, like you said, it's not about one. It's not a one chain race. It's kind of like there's a contribution that everyone makes, and it's all about that firstly the psychological impact, and then secondly the technological impact. So psychologically, people are more comfortable with it, and then obviously the technology then gets built in order to facilitate that. And I think we're starting to see that, I mean, and then there was that so-called scam project that came along that was claiming that they could do ZKSync on top of Bitcoin, and so it's kind of like the combination. So technically, I'm a little bit in the wilderness around that, but what essentially landed up transpiring was this whole idea that they could do ZKSync functionality on Bitcoin, and they were called out as basically being a scam project. I don't know what's transpired. I think it was SAVM or Satoshi VM or something like that.
Yeah.
And that in itself is also like part of this experiment. It's kind of like, well, you can't make statements like that. It's not what this is actually all about. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I
I
think,
don't know if you remember that.
yeah, I remember that project, and a lot of the people who were, mentioning it quite frequently on social media. Um, I think, uh, like in a positive light, I guess, a lot of these projects who want to build cool things on Bitcoin, whether they actually try to or not. Um, I think the reason why like the next halving period is pivotal for Bitcoin is because a lot of these projects like can't even build on Bitcoin right now. That's kind of like the whole like part of this whole puzzle is this soft fork around the opcat opcode. I actually forget the BIP number, but it was memed as BIP 420. And if that is activated, a bunch of these other projects can actually start building on Bitcoin. And then we'll see even more sort of like experimentation and testing and failures and successes on Bitcoin. So, at least in our case, with the Spider chain, we can, and our testnet is live right now. We can build on Bitcoin as it is. We don't need to change Bitcoin. If Bitcoin changes, it unlocks some cool additional functionalities for us. And it also enables a bunch of other teams to actually start building on Bitcoin. So I think we're in like the late stages of the first kind of season of this new period for Bitcoin. What I mean by that is like we've seen a lot of scammy layer two projects sort of already kind of like the market has decided, all right, these aren't serious people. Maybe we misallocated some of our capital here. And some winners are starting to rise above the rest. But a lot of these projects haven't even like started. A lot of the other projects haven't even started yet because they're limited in terms of what they can actually build on Bitcoin right now. And once that changes, we'll get a next season, a next phase of this Bitcoin renaissance, and very excited to see that too. So I think like changing Bitcoin is always like a controversial thing. I think OPCAT is very cool, and I hope it's activated. If not, I think a lot of these projects, I know they'll kind of have a difficult time. But I want like my personal philosophy is I want people to try and build as much cool stuff on Bitcoin, no matter like the failure rate as possible. Like I'm obviously never supporting like scammy teams. But as far as I'm concerned, like almost everything is on the table in terms of like consideration for what we should build on Bitcoin, because we need to like bring back a culture of experimental builders and users who care about Bitcoin and want to use the chain and build things on the chain and get other people to use and build things on the chain. Um, and that's the future I want to see for Bitcoin over the next 3 to 4 years. So soft forks, maybe like other teams that are building on Bitcoin right now, without the soft fork. I just want to see people building on Bitcoin. Yeah, and I think almost everything, like in terms of proposals and changes and layer twos and everything I can think of. There are lots of trade offs and some issues with some of these proposals, but as far as I'm concerned, everything is generally on the table and should be considered.
I want to come back to OPCAT after this next question, and the question's a bit of a technical one, so kind of like we'll give you a pass if you can't answer it, but it's like it's more around like the perceived kind of like functional and technical aspect of an L2 versus a side chain. Do you know what distinguishes between the two? And like, I know that like Core identify themselves as a side chain. I know that Botanix is identifying themselves as an L2. What are the difference? What is the difference between the two? Like in essence, because I'm not quite following what that might be at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think I know some people are kind of disenfranchised with maybe how they perceive the label layer two being abused lately.
Yeah,
Um, I think there's a few different subcategories in the general bucket of layer twos. Some of them are side chains, like the spider chain. Some of them are like rollups. Some of them are payment channel layer twos, like the Lightning Network. There's also state channels. So I think we don't need to necessarily parse like the technical nuance too deeply. It's kind of like, so a little bit back in Bitcoin's history, people used to refer to Lightning Network transactions as off-chain transactions, and then we kind of like decided that's actually a pretty bad thing. That's like a bad label, because like off-chain now we kind of assume is like on Coinbase or Cash App or Kraken or something. That's off-chain. We have to kind of differentiate between on-chain but like above or beside, and then truly off-chain like in just like a TradFi DApp. So I think you may get some mean comments from me saying this on the episode. I don't know, but I think like the layer two label is a little bit broader than maybe people think. There's different types of layer twos. You can call them you can call them kind of whatever you want, I guess, in some way. That's actually probably way too generous, but there's some nuance there. I don't think it's super productive to try and parse, um, the exact minutia and definition of what a layer two is or what a layer two is not, because it's kind of generally accepted, like building on and beside a base layer. More often than not, you probably fit most of the qualifications for being a layer two. Um, I think some of these teams that just kind of use Bitcoin as like a data availability layer probably are stretching the the bucket of being a layer two a little bit too much. But I don't want to like it's kind of a very broad label, and it's become a little bit more broad than most people like. But
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I view it.
And OPCAT, what is that exactly about? Because I was only recently introduced to it, and it was kind of like delivered to me in the sense of, well, it's actually like a really small thing. The maxis are losing their minds over it, and that's always interesting, obviously for entertainment value. And but I'm really curious as to, and they've got an amazing website. I mean, I actually went, I saw the website. It's obviously this PDF. What is it in essence about in terms of what it is that it can bring to the table?
Yeah. I won't pretend to be an expert in OPCAT. I think so. At Botanix Labs, our CTO Armin is actually one of the co-authors of the BIP that is proposing this to be merged into Bitcoin Core, and then after that, sort of the biggest phase is kind of achieving consensus to activate it as part of the network. And then the Quantum Cats project with the Taproot Wizards is kind of doing a lot of the memeing and marketing around OpCat.
Yes.
Um, it is a fairly small like protocol change. Soft forks are always kind of big events, but it like at the highest level, it kind of adds. So there's a lot of ways to approach this. Like some people who kind of think OpCat generally is a good thing want it to be paired with other functionality added to Bitcoin. So like pushing OpCat through on its own may not be something they are necessarily a fan of. But OPCAT paired with other things to kind of maximize the functionality that we're adding to Bitcoin through covenants and other things is kind of their goal. But generally, there's this idea that activating OPCAT would create a lot of new possibilities and flexibility for being able to build cool stuff on Bitcoin. Because part of what makes Bitcoin difficult to build on, not only is that like kind of there's like brain drain and people have just kind of like stopped trying to build on Bitcoin, and so that like that kind of rust factor, no pun intended, I guess, is an issue. But also like it's very limiting. Bitcoin is very limiting in terms of what you can build with its script. So activating OPCAT, is kind of a step to change that. OPCAT historically was kind of a bucket of it was removed. It was activated previously, then Satoshi kind of deactivated it. I can't remember the exact number. It was either 14 or 15 total opcodes. They just kind of got put on the chopping block, and opcat was one of them. A lot of other useful stuff was in there, like division and multiplication and other things, and things I'm sure Bitcoin Core developers wish they had now. So like this whole project is kind of like trying to bring things back to Bitcoin that maybe we wish we had all along.
Do you think it's going to pass, or do you think it's going to get resisted?
I think it'll definitely get resisted. I think everyone won't be a fan of it, but I'm optimistic that there will be like social consensus around it. The timeline is the big question. I don't think it will happen this year. I think it'll probably happen before the next halving during this this 4-year window. This next halving cycle is a very big period for Bitcoin, in my opinion. And I think we should. I hope we see OPCAT live activated during that period, but I don't know. Not sure. So I would bet against it happening this year. But I hope it happens in the next year or two, in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Listen, there's so much that we can talk about. I know that you've got to run in 5 minutes, so I think my final question will be: it has to be like, where do you think we are going? Especially in the next kind of 6 to 12 months from a market perspective. This is purely a selfish question. I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are in terms of market and what's cooking.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm always I'm more bullish now than ever on Bitcoin. I think not just from a price perspective, but from a culture perspective, growth, adoption, but also I think the past, we're back near-ish at all-time highs. And I think a lot of that recovery was kind of just a rebound from a lot of the shitty things that happened after the FTX and industry-wide blow up. Also, we have a lot of new financial products with US spot ETFs coming on the scene. So I don't think we're near a phase of kind of market euphoria where we should all be kind of scared and cautious and prepare to go home for another bearish cycle. I think we're just getting started. There's so much to do. There's so much to build, and a lot of the markup in price and the bounce back in attention and mind share, I think are just from sort of very normal things. New financial products, sort of a industry-wide recovery and faith from natives, crypto natives after all that FTX bullshit. And now the stage is kind of set for a ton of new people to come in and explore, hopefully Bitcoin, but other stuff in crypto too. So, yeah, I think we're just getting started.
Bullish. I like it. And on that note, thanks so much for joining, Zach. I know you're super busy, and it's been really cool to chat to you. Genuinely, really nice to hear your thoughts and perspectives. And best of luck with this new adventure that you're on. Look forward to seeing how that develops. We've got our eye close on Botanix. I think there's a lot of amazing stuff happening there. So best of luck with that, and hopefully we'll get you back. In fact, we will. We'll bend your rubber arm and get you back. And thanks so much for your time once again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was awesome chatting with you. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll be back, later this summer or fall, depending on how much crazy stuff happens between now and then. But yeah, I appreciate it. Look forward to next time.
All right, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on for next time. See ya.